There have been a number of trends that have been underway already for over a decade that are impacting all industries, from new customer preferences to digital transformation, personalization. We've got tech substitutes, regulatory uncertainty, cybersecurity. Of course, we got the trio of blockchain, AI, and big data, data analytics, P2P and platform business models, distrust of many brands, and Internet of Things. And what COVID has done has not introduced new trends, but rather accelerated these trends. What was going to happen in 10 years is now happening in 10 months. And the question, therefore, for us, as we know in times of change, what do we want to be? Do we want to be a thinker or an outthinker? Do we want to keep going over the high bar forward, or do we want to learn the new approach? Do we want to go over backward? Do we want to be an outthinker? And I assume that if you're here today, you want to be an outthinker. And we're going to get into specifically what we need to do that. Great strategies always begin with an envisioning of the future. What is the future context going to look like? Who do we want to be there? And what do we need to do, therefore, to achieve that desired outcome? And the challenge that COVID has thrust into all of our decision-making is that whereas before we could isolate one or two possible scenarios that were more likely to happen than the other, today we have to plan for multiple scenarios. And these are near-term scenarios. So near-term potential scenarios that we need to plan for. And I like to think of it as the scenarios falling across two different dimensions. Either we're going to return to business as usual, people are going to get back on planes, they're going to get back into restaurants, etc., or what we return to is going to be very different. And then the other dimension is how long does it take to get to that new normal, if you will? Is it going to be a short recovery or a long recovery? What we see is that there are four possible scenarios that we need to be prepared for now, and our strategy should have elements of all four of them in there. So in a short recovery in which we return to business as usual, what we need is a protect strategy. Really batten down the hatches and hold on to what we have, because we're going back to the way things were. In the return over a long term, what we have to have is an endure strategy. And that means that we are still battening down the hatches, but maybe we need to be a little more aggressive in cost containment and managing our core business frugally so that we can get to the new normal in one piece. However, I think in many industries, indeed most industries, what we're going to return to is not what was there before, but we're going to return to something very different. Now, if we get there quickly, if we have a short recovery and we return to something different, what you need is a pivot strategy to very quickly, in a contracted period of time, rethink, reimagine, reinvent your business model to be relevant for the new future. Or if it's going to take us a long time to get there, what we really need is need a reinvent strategy. So take the time to really rethink the entire business model and to redesign who we are, who we serve, what we do, what our value proposition is. Now, again, in times of past, you could pick one of these scenarios as your predominant scenario, but under the uncertainty we're facing today, we really need to be ready to pounce on any four of these as they emerge. So we need to have a strategy for all four scenarios. A nice way to think about what it's going to take for you to make it through COVID is to consider yourself or your company to be an airplane. And you're at a certain altitude and you've hit turbulence. Now, there's a lot of turbulence, and there's turbulence across lots of altitudes, but there are altitudes where there is not only a lack of turbulence, but there are tailwinds. You know, McDonald's is doing fine. MasterCard is doing great. Walmart, Amazon, there are some industries and some companies in industries that are actually accelerating their success due to COVID. So the first thing to notice is that you are at an altitude where you are feeling turbulence, but we can move to another altitude. Now, what is it going to take to get there? Well, there are really two strategic factors to look at. One is, how much fuel do you burn? And the second one is, how much fuel do you have? If an airplane doesn't burn a lot of fuel and it's got a lot in its tank, then it has a lot of time and strategic flexibility to find that new altitude. However, a plane that is almost running on empty, is burning a lot of fuel, is in real trouble. So to translate that into business, what we're talking about is we're talking about profitability and balance sheet. A highly profitable business is like an airplane that doesn't burn a lot of fuel because it's actually producing fuel as it goes. A company that has a strong balance sheet has a lot of fuel in the tank. So what I did is I took 96 different industries and I analyzed indicators of their balance sheet strength and their profitability, compared them against each other. And if we do that, we end up with 4 different scenarios that industries are going to be facing. If they have a strong balance sheet and they're profitable, in other words, if they're low burn and they've got a lot in their tank, they're going to be thriving. If they are profitable but have high debt and they don't have much in the tank, but they're not burning a lot, they're going to stay alive. If they are a strong balance sheet company or industry and low margin, we call that survive. And if they're low margin and high debt, in other words, they're burning a lot and they are not doing, they don't have a lot of fuel in the tank, then that's what I call take a dive, unfortunately. And if we look at the industries and we divide them across them, what we see is industries that are obviously doing poorly. So we look down to the bottom left-hand quadrant over here, the take a dive companies. It's no surprise that we're seeing a lot of bankruptcies and struggles in retail, publishing, food wholesale, restaurants and dining, transportation. But there are surprising players and industries and sectors in the other areas. The thrive companies that we can expect to see will be healthcare products, information services, oil and gas, real estate. The alive companies are primarily financial service companies like regional banks, asset management companies, but also cable TV companies, utilities, green and renewable energy. Survive companies are things like steel, shipping, marine, reinsurance, paper, these kind of like big, large-scale industries that have strong balance sheets, and they compete on scale even though they don't have strong profit margins. So step 1 is for you to assess what your strategic situation is. How much fuel do you have in your tank, and how much fuel is your airplane burning? Step 2, of course, will then be to identify where is the next altitude and how can you redirect your airplane to get into the tailwinds.